At this time, I invite our three Thanksgivers to please come forward. For about 35 years in three different churches, I've promoted a Thanksgivers Sunday where members of the congregation talk about what gratitude to God means to them. And in all three of those congregations, many people have said to me that that service, that particular flow of the year has been their most meaningful and most inspirational. To hear fellow church members talk about how faith has impacted their lives and allowed them to express gratitude to God.
Good morning. My name is Lindsay Harrell, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about gratitude. When someone asks, "What are you grateful for?" I can't help but think back to my school days, where over the years, more than one teacher assigned an essay on this very topic. As a kid, I equated gratitude simply to the happy or positive things in my life. Things like my family, my best friend, my dogs, summer camp, snow days, and perhaps having finally mastered a back handspring in gymnastics class. As a 35-year-old, I would say my gratitude list has some considerable additions that reflect a few more decades of living and experience. I now have a supportive husband and a bouncing 2-year-old son, a house of my own, a church home, and an education, to name a few. That back handspring is no longer on my list. Bones would surely be broken if that was attempted today. But unlike my gratitude list from childhood, my grown-up list would include another aspect. It would include my challenges and hardships. Specifically, it would include gratitude for the powerful personal growth God orchestrates when one is struggling through dark times. In 2010, after 2 years of marriage, my husband Mike and I decided we were ready to settle down and start a family. Not long after, we were thrilled to discover we were expecting our first child. Well, thrilled and slightly terrified. No other moment in my life remotely compared to the overwhelming emotions I was feeling, thinking of this new little person who would soon be joining our household. It was exhilarating. 3 days later, however, our excitement fell apart when I suffered a miscarriage. Caught off guard and deeply disappointed, I vowed to collect myself and move forward. This was quite common, I was told. Lots of women who lose pregnancies go on to have children. Several months later, we learned that we were expecting again. A little more cautious this time, Mike and I tiptoed through those early doctor's appointments and delighted in the magical sound of the baby's heartbeat on the ultrasound. Gradually, we began to share the news with close family and friends. As I neared the 12-week mark, when the chances of a miscarriage substantially drop, I found myself believing that this was actually going to happen. We were going to become parents. I wanted to give God a big high five. So in the doctor's office at the end of my first trimester, with wide eyes and a hopeful heart, my body stiffened when the nurse looked at us both and uttered those awful words, "I'm so sorry." And just like that, for the second time, my hopes, visions, and dreams of those babies were gone. I hadn't planned for this, and suddenly my life shifted in a new and unfamiliar direction. In the coming weeks, depression and debilitating anxiety invaded. My weight plummeted, and I couldn't sleep. Like a robot, I went through the motions during the day and collapsed into a sullen heap when I was alone. People didn't really know what to do with me. Those who knew what had happened seemed afraid to broach the subject, perhaps fearing that bringing up my losses would make me too sad or uncomfortable. I was ashamed to admit that I felt jealous of other young families, the ones I knew personally and the ones I would see in restaurants and in stores. Babies were everywhere, and the knife that was lodged in my heart seemed to twist deeper and deeper with each sighting. I knew I had hit my lowest point when I shut down all conversation with God feeling too sad and frustrated to talk to him. Late one night, in a haze of sleeplessness and tears, I looked up at the ceiling and cried out loud, "God, why is this happening? Don't you think I would make a good mom?" Met with silence, I angrily laid back down. The next morning, I called my parents for some guidance. My father answered the phone, and after listening to me ramble for a moment, he said something simple and profound. "Lindsay," he said, "get up, get dressed, and go do something nice for someone right now." It seemed like reasonable advice, and even though I was in my 30s, when Dad tells you to do something, you generally do it. So I got up, got dressed, and as if being pulled by an invisible force, I drove straight over to the nursing home where my 93-year-old friend Evelyn lived. Evelyn's blue eyes shone when I walked into the room. I sat on her bed and spent the next 2 hours talking about whatever she wanted to talk about. I surely didn't think I was good company that morning, but Evelyn happily chattered on, as if she had been waiting for me. Momentarily, my anxious heart began to feel an inkling of peace again. This was my first indication that maybe God had been listening to me that night. A month later, my heart was still raw. One afternoon, Mike and I got a call from the church, seeing if we were interested in attending the upcoming Walk to Emmaus, separate men's and women's spiritual retreats being held at Asbury. Having never heard of the Emmaus community, I reluctantly agreed to go. A change of scenery would be nice, I thought, and it was obvious that my spirit was in need of renewal. Weeks later, I arrived at Asbury with women of all ages, from all walks of life, and from a variety of religious backgrounds. The next few days and nights were long but transformative. Through laughter, tears, silence, and prayer, those women urged me to seek and not shun God as I started on this path to healing. By Sunday, I knew in my heart that God was using others to guide and see me through this. In the coming months, I suffered another miscarriage. My heart was broken again, but something was different this time. I had changed, and though I couldn't pinpoint exactly how, I felt strongly compelled to pour my grieving self into community service. Recalling my dad's advice on the phone that day about doing something for someone else when your own burdens are heavy, I started to realize that in stepping out of my own pain, I could still provide something for others. It didn't matter how bruised or broken I felt, or if I felt like I had nothing to offer. I just had to show up as I was, and God would surely guide me from there. And he did. With Mike's encouragement, I started to break out of my shell. I began volunteering regularly with Central Kentucky Radio Eye, which is a nonprofit radio reading service for the visually impaired. I became a tour guide at the Hunt Morgan House downtown, where I met dozens of interesting travelers each week. I rejoined Mike as an 8:30 usher, and despite the early mornings, came to look forward to greeting and getting to know fellow churchgoers. And I signed up to tutor a third-grade girl down at the Carnegie Center. Though I was not a parent, I relished in the responsibility of mentoring this child, if even for just an hour a week. While I taught her about grammar and sentence structure, she gave me her trust and refreshed my sense of purpose. I realized that I didn't have to have a child of my own to feel needed and engaged with my sisters and brothers. There were opportunities for me to share my gifts and to receive gifts from others all around me. It was time to start thanking God again, not only for pulling me out of that dark place, but for giving me the gift of other people. I thanked him for those he had and was continuing to place in my life, young, old, and in between. I thanked him for the women who have since shared with me their own struggles of pregnancy loss and grief. And ultimately, I thanked him for this extraordinary opportunity to grow. While the memories of those lost babies will forever stir up an ache in my heart, the spiritual tools I have gained along the way have brought me more joy and compassion for others than I ever could have imagined. On July 23rd, 2013, at 7:45 p.m., Mike and I welcomed a healthy baby boy into our family. My gratitude for Franklin Klein Harrell, or Frankie as we call him, cannot be expressed in words. He quite simply brings a joy to me that is godly. While his arrival into this world came years after I expected, I am reminded to be grateful for the whole process and not just the singular events. In the words of Psalm 130, I wait for the Lord, my whole being waits, and in his word I put my hope. Amen.